Welcome, Steelers fans, to Heavy on Steelers. I'm Allison Kohler, and joining me today is none other than former general manager and NFL Executive of the Year, Randy Mueller. Randy spent over 30 years in NFL front offices, and now he's Heavy's very own front office insider with tons of expert knowledge to drop today. We're going to talk all things Steelers, starting with the first wave of free agency. Welcome, Randy.
Thank you, Allison. It's good to be back. Glad to be with you on Heavy.
Awesome. Let's get to it. This is Kevin Colbert's final draft as general manager of the Steelers. He said he wouldn't leave the team high and dry, and boy, he wasn't kidding. For a team that believes in building through the draft, this is one of the most active free agencies in recent memory, and it's really exciting to see. To recap for the fans, so far this offseason, Pittsburgh's addressed major deficiencies along the offensive line with guard James Daniels and center Mason Cole. They've shored up the defensive backfield with Levi Wallace and Akella Witherspoon and got stronger in the middle with linebacker Miles Jack. They've even re-signed a replacement for Ray McLeod in what seems to be a more talented Gunnar Olszewski. Most recently, the Steelers added depth with defensive end Jannard Avery. Oh, and they've signed a former first-round quarterback by the name of Mitch Trubisky. As a guy who's been involved in his fair share of free agency periods, what kind of grade would you give the Steelers after their first wave of free agency?
I actually thought, Allison, the first week they did awesome. I would have given them an A-. I mean, I thought Kevin did a really good job. Let's face it, the Steelers have lacked some core depth, right? They have not had the amount of players that the teams that they play against have had. And I mean, all the way through their roster, they've just lacked, and especially in the offensive line. I think James Daniels is a great addition and an example of that. He's a guy that played center at Iowa, played guard with the Bears. I think the guy could play about anywhere. And what it is, it's his skill set that fits the Steelers scheme. He's very athletic, but yet he's powerful with his hands. A lot of football stuff where the fit is what matters. And I thought he was great. I thought Mitch Trubisky signing was excellent because these signings as a whole are all value oriented. I thought what they paid to get Mitch Trubisky was a lot less than I thought he would get on the open market. So I think it's a good move. I think what they said when they signed Mitch was they were willing to put more of the blame on really the chaos in Chicago and maybe Matt Nagy's system than they were on Mitch himself. Mitch had a couple good years there. It just didn't work out to where they were able to develop his skill set. And I think Mitch going to the Bills and sitting behind Josh Allen for a year really did wonders for one, his psyche, and two, to understand a different type of system. And I think he'll have some of that similarity in systems when he goes to Pittsburgh. So I like it. I like the corner signing as well. I think they've done a really good job. And it doesn't mean they've won the press conferences, but so much of free agency is based on value. And there's a difference between evaluating players and then valuing them. And Kevin has been through the game. He understands it. And they may not have spent a ton of money, but they've made some reasonable, solid deals to expand the core of their roster.
Mm-hmm. And just from experience, do you think that Mitch Trubisky had any say in the Steelers looking at James Daniels, being that they played together in the past?
Well, it's possible. I know this. It probably more than likely, though, had to do with the way the Steelers scouting department felt about James coming out of Iowa. I think that probably entered into it as well. I think the fact that he has a history with Mitch obviously helps. Again, I think James Daniels was the Bears' best offensive lineman. Now, I know their offensive line was a little bit tattered and in shambles at times, but I love his versatility and the fact that he played center at Iowa. Maybe they see him as a center as well. So I think the versatility is good. I think it's a good fit. The fact that Mitch knows him, like you mentioned, I don't think it hurts. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah. And Mike Tomlin he's always been one of those coaches who's all about versatility. He really loves to have players come in who can play multiple positions. And I think James Daniels, fits that really well. So it's pretty awesome for the line because they definitely needed a ton of help along the line. And I'm really glad they're finally addressing that.
And I don't think they're done yet. I think
no, that's true.
It's probably going to bring them a tackle of some kind to throw in the mix as well. So,
And so on the surface, the Steelers have a couple of holes at wide receiver and the safety positions. who are some of the free agent receivers and safeties that you feel could be a potential fit in Pittsburgh?
Well, I think it's about value, and I think it's about what the market lends. I don't think they will pay big money for either. I think you'll see some maybe an identification of a ascending type player that just didn't fit somewhere else, or somebody whose market value has taken a hit and they can get at the right price. I thought a guy like Cole Beasley would be interested as well. If you look at the Buffalo receivers, Cole Beasley, 82 catches last year, Emmanuel Sanders, 42 catches. You talk about familiarity with Mitch Trubisky. That's the best thing I think they could do for him, is bring in a receiver or two that he's comfortable with, that actually knows exactly his strengths and weaknesses. So I think those two guys would be really good signings. The Cole Beasley numbers of catches are up, but his average per catch is down a little bit. I think that system that they run with Matt Canada in Pittsburgh is tailor-made for a guy like Cole Beasley. They have lacked that little shiftiness in the slot. They've lacked that third down and red zone targets, and I think Emmanuel could help there as well. So both of those guys played on one-year deals last year. Cole Beasley was cut because of salary cap reasons. Emmanuel Sanders was on a one-year deal that paid him $6 million last year. So you got to figure they could get him for something like that, maybe less. And I think those are two areas where they'll look. They'll probably also look in the draft a little bit, like we said, for receivers as well. They have had a really good history of drafting receivers in the second round or later. If you look back at Kevin Colbert's track record, whether it's Claypool, whether it's Deontay Johnson, whether it's, Juju, he's drafted some good receivers and he knows what he's looking for. So their criteria has been consistent, and I could see him doing that in a, fairly good draft for wide receivers this year. Maybe it's a kid like Sky Moore, who's kind of a Western Michigan kid who can play inside, he can play outside, he can be a return guy, he can do all kinds of stuff. Like you say, he's kind of a Swiss Army knife, and I think they could find some value with him as well. So I don't think they're done making that over yet. As far as safeties go, they're going to have to commit some money to Mika Fitzpatrick. And so it's going to be hard to commit any more money to another safety besides that. So I don't think they're going to be in the market for a even medium priced safety in free agency. I think they're probably going to have to go younger there and get a guy who can play opposite the skill set that Mika Fitzpatrick brings. Maybe it's more of a box safety. Maybe it's more of a physical presence in and around the line of scrimmage. But I think they're going to probably have to go younger at the safety position just because of what it's going to take to sign Mika long term.
Yeah, even Kevin Colbert said at the NFL annual meeting this year that they're leaning more toward players, right off as close to their first contract as possible. Yeah. So I sort of feel like that was him saying, Tyrann Mathieu was, out of the question. So, which is disappointing because, even to this day, Steelers fans are beating down the door for Tyrann Mathieu. So, and obviously him and Fitzpatrick in the backfield, I mean, that would just be absolutely amazing. But you're right, he's probably out of their price range.
I think what they did with Miles Jack, Allison, gives them some flexibility as well. I thought that was a great get, in that a guy is really a run and hit guy who some of us, I was one of them, when he came out of school, thought he might be a box safety, might be a more of a safety type because he was so darn athletic and could make plays all over the place. And that's a spot I think they've lacked, is a guy that has that versatility, at least can play. He could play nickel linebacker and fill some areas in the box. So I don't think you could just turn your back on Miles Jack being one of those guys that helps them in certain down and distances as well.
Yeah, I think he's particularly valuable, especially given, the situation that Devin Bush is in, being a little bit mentally and maybe physically not, ready, or at least last season he wasn't. So hopefully Jack's presence in Pittsburgh will help Devin Bush as well. Kind of circling back to Trubisky, he was an interesting signing, low risk, high reward. It's pretty rare that a quarterback, bounces back after what was an average to above average play, even in a new system. Being a former quarterback yourself, a thing or two about the position. I know it's early in the game for Trubisky in Pittsburgh, but given what you've seen from him in 5 seasons, 4 as a starter, do you think he could find long-term success in Pittsburgh? Is he destined to be a journeyman or somewhere in between?
I actually think a lot of Mitch Trubisky. And again, I thought when he came out, I was like the majority, we had him all of us rated in the first round. I don't know about the second pick, but that's where the line of delineation kind of came for him and the expectations. I think we all thought the talent was there. The problem is when he was at North Carolina, he only played one season. He was a one-season wonder, and so there wasn't a lot of body of work. He goes to Chicago, and all the pressures and expectations of being a really high first-round pick kind of took over for him in a system that really wasn't suited for him. I don't think Matt Nagy did him any favors. I don't think the system progressed him along. And he had to learn a couple of different systems early in his career. So I think there's something in the tank for Mitch Trubisky. I think the fact that Brian Daboll and the Giants wanted him to come there told me a lot about what they thought, what Brian Daboll thought of him, which is a good indicator that he thought the future was right for Mitch as well. I think it's a really good fit for him. I think he does have some upside. If he can click with Matt Canada on offense and they can do some of the things that Mitch's skill set can do. He's a really good athlete. He can make throws on the run, but he's also a pretty good passer from the pocket. So I just like his versatility. And so I think there is a future with him. I think there's upside, and the contract is kind of built in that it's a 2-year deal now, and he can build some upside in it. I think it's a good get for the Steelers. I really do. And I think I'm not going to say they found their long-term answer, because if I'm them, I might still look in the draft a little further. But I'm happy to have Mitch if I'm them, and I think there's some upside. I don't think Steelers fans should poo-poo Mitch Trubisky coming there just because of what they may have seen in Chicago. I think there was a lot of blame to go around for everybody in Chicago, not just Mitch.
Right. And sticking with the quarterback position, knowing how important it is to get the position right and that it can take many attempts. Why do you think the Steelers waited until Ben Roethlisberger's retirement to attempt to acquire a potential predecessor? Because it seemed pretty early on that Mason Rudolph wasn't it.
My answer to that, Allison, is I think they tried, and I think they knew that it might be a mistake for one more year, but I don't think they had any options. I think Kevin knew early on in the process that he wasn't going to be able to draft one because they picked too low. He wasn't going to be able to sign one that was better than Ben off the street. In other words, a guy that had been rejected elsewhere. And so their last resort was to rework Ben's deal. So I think they knew it. I think they also knew what they were getting in Ben and just figured we're going to have to grin and bear it for a year and try to solve it next year. I know they were criticized by some on bigger platforms that said, hey, this is a mistake bringing Ben back. He's seen his better days. I don't disagree with that. But I just don't think there were any options. Kevin had no more cards to play with regard to signing a better quarterback or drafting one. So it's just like, hey, we had the punt last year, and now we're going to fix it this year. So I think everybody kind of knew he couldn't say that. So, I think it's viewed now as maybe 1 year too late. But sometimes it's about timing. You can't create, answers when you have a need. And you're a little bit a victim of picking out of a pool that some years is good, some years isn't so good.
Right. Yeah. So, and going back to the wide receivers, the Steelers, they lost a lot of wide receivers in free agency, Juju Smith-Schuster, Ray McLeod, who I mentioned earlier, and James Washington. If Chase Claypool can right the ship in year 3, Pittsburgh is looking at 2 solid starters in Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool, but things get dicey after that on the depth chart. All of this sort of leans itself toward Pittsburgh taking a receiver in the early rounds. Who's caught your eye as a potential first or second rounder for the Steelers to grab?
Well, I think they're going to have to find someone to take the top on the defense. And whether it's the Burks kid from Arkansas or a Sky Moore that's more of a slot guy, those kind of guys make teams defend you different. So I would look for either one of those guys to be a pretty good fit for Pittsburgh. Sometimes it's less about the particular person, Allison, and it's more about the skill set that you're looking for. In other words, I just need speed, or I need, a guy that can catch. I need a specific skill set that we lack as a group. And I think Kevin has always done a good job of identifying skill sets that they don't have. So then it's just about lining them up with players that have the skill set that you're missing from a team building standpoint. So I could see them drafting one of these guys that's fast and can stretch the defense, which again helps the running game, which will help the running back, which will help Matt Canada. It kind of goes hand in hand, but defenses have to defend speed different. So I could see them adding that element come draft time.
Yeah, Tomlin does like his speedy receivers, that's for sure. And you're right, it is a domino effect. I mean, if they get a receiver who can help the running game, who can help the offense, who can help Matt Canada, it might be actually a decent season for Pittsburgh. As far as who it's right, yeah, exactly. Fingers crossed. As for who would throw the ball to the receiver, even after Trubisky's signing, there's still a lot of buzz coming out of Pittsburgh, that about whether they'll select a quarterback in the draft and when. Where do you rank the top quarterbacks in Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Matt Corral, Sam Howell, Desmond Howard, and Carson Strong? And what scenarios do you see the Steelers snagging one of them?
I think it's really interesting, this group of quarterbacks this year, because a lot of the pundits, a lot of the analysts on the outside have what they think are 4 or 5 quarterbacks that are worthy of, being drafted in that first round. I think the difference between those who evaluate on the outside of NFL buildings and those on the inside is really the criteria. In the NFL, and it's not a secret, this is not a exact science, but we're not looking for quarterbacks that are 6 foot or less. They're just not. And so in this, let's just start with that premise out of this year's group. The only guy that's really fits the bill for that and checks the box is Kenny Pickett. He's 6'3". He can make all the throws. He is pretty good in the pocket and processing. For my money, he's the only guy that's even attributable to anything that an NFL offense traditionally wants to run. Nothing against Malik Willis, nothing against Howell, nothing against Matt Corral. These guys are all smaller guys. These are guys that function in play action, on the run, moving some things. We have that in Mitch Trubisky. We don't need to go that direction as it relates to the Steelers. But if we can find a pocket passer, a guy that's 6'3", that happens to be a guy that we watch practice every day for how many years now, he shares the same building with us. To me, that still makes sense. Even though we drafted signed Mitch Trubisky, I could make sense of the Steelers going for a guy like Pickett. Now, I think Pickett will be gone, so they're not going to have that choice. I just don't see all the other quarterbacks being possibilities. I think they are projects. I think maybe at some point they become players, but I don't think anybody's going to draft a project in the first round. I think that's crazy. Maybe you can consider it in the second round, depending on what other options you have of team building. You just can't go out because you think you need a young quarterback and pick one and decide to develop them. That's just not the way it works. So the criteria is different when you're actually investing a first round pick than it is for those of us on the outside who just want to plug and play the next best quarterback. So it can be complicated. And hopefully I didn't just confuse all of our listeners, but that's kind of the way they see it on the inside. Start with the criteria of, hey, we're looking for 6'3", guys that can make throws from the pocket, and we want to be able to stretch the field any way we can from the pocket. There's not many of those guys.
Yeah. And I would think even given Ben Roethlisberger's size, for them to go in a total opposite direction, with a guy under 6 foot, it's just doesn't seem like something Pittsburgh would do.
I would agree.
But let's pretend for a moment that the Steelers do select a quarterback early in the draft. How do you potentially see that playing out with the Trubisky signing?
I think they could make a perceived weakness a giant strength. And I don't see how that's a bad play. I don't think in team building we'd ever say, no, don't do that. Don't make that a strength. I think we obviously know they have Trubisky. If they were to draft a Kenny Pickett with their pick, I think it's become a strength and it fits perfectly because Trubisky plays, or let's even say Mason Rudolph. I don't think Kevin Colbert has given up on Mason Rudolph yet, like Steeler fans have. So I think there's a little bit there in the tank that just still, I think there's some hope there. But let's just say Trubisky is the best guy for us right now. Doesn't mean he's the best guy week 6, week 7, week 8, while Kenny Pickett's sorting things out. Again, there's always going to be a period of adjusting, a period of learning. So I think it could be a really good situation. And I've never been one to say, oh, we can't have too many quarterbacks. I want to have choices. Hey, one year at the Saints, we had Jake Delhomme, we had Aaron Brooks, we had Mark Bulger, All three ended up being NFL starters, and they were all on our roster when we went to training camp one year in New Orleans. So I'm always for, hey, let's bring in another guy, let him compete. Things work out. Trust me, things work out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It can never hurt, especially for a team like Pittsburgh, who doesn't really have a sure answer for the future in terms of the quarterback play. To have too many quarterbacks is not a bad thing. Right. Yeah. Of the top quarterbacks, you've already said that you believe that Pickett is the most NFL ready of the soft lot. And the rest, so you would say that the rest are projects. If they were to draft somebody like a Malik Willis or Desmond Ridder, they would be project quarterbacks, correct?
For me, I just think I see skill sets, I see flashes of what they can be. I just don't see a body of work that I could say, hey, let's draft that and early enough to where you're going to have to play him. I think that would be a mistake. I do see one guy in the second group that is out of Western Kentucky, Bailey Zappi, who is a 6-foot guy who kind of challenges my theory of what I just talked about. But he shows me the skill set, and I'm not saying he's Russell Wilson or Drew Brees, but he's kind of like that in that his throwing motion, his accuracy, his instincts, his attention to detail, all those things are evident to me. And I think someone's going to find him to be an option that, hey, we might be able to work with this guy, and he might come along sooner than later because he can really process. He operates like an NFL quarterback now, and that's, like I said, Bailey Zappi at Western Kentucky. So he's the wild card for me that I'd throw in the mix if I was a team looking to bring a quarterback in to play, in the first couple years.
Yeah. Kevin Colbert has said multiple times, they want that fourth arm, that fourth quarterback. So I could see a situation where, maybe later in the draft, they take that and kind of see what happens with them. So as we mentioned at the top of the show, Kevin Colbert is stepping down after the draft. The Steelers have interviewed 16 candidates, 2 internal, with plans to interview more after the draft. I sort of get the feeling that the Steelers already have their guy in-house in either Brandon Hunt or Omar Khan, maybe leaning toward Hunt. What do you think about the Steelers GM search? Do you think any of the external candidates have a legit shot?
I will say this. I think their search has obviously been thorough, the amount of people they went through and visited with. And sometimes these searches, Allison, are more about gathering information for yourself than anything else. You might want to pick a guy's brain as you bring him in and just see how he views your own team. So you're gaining information about your own set of circumstances while learning about the candidate. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. I think they've done good. I think obviously they'll interview a couple more guys who are under contract with other teams. But it would not surprise me if Hunt and Khan kind of shared the job going forward. So I'm in agreement with you a little bit. They probably have an idea of where they want to go. Most of the time when these searches start, you kind of have an indicator of how they might end, having been a part of a few of those, both in the hiring process and as a candidate. So that could lend itself to. And if they did that, both Omar and Brandon Hunt are capable and obviously confident people in their own right. It might mean a little more juice for a guy like Mike Tomlin. And therefore, they've minimized some change. They've elevated the people from within. And it's not a one-man job, no matter how you look at it. So maybe the 3 of them have a really good working connection already. And I could see that making a lot of sense. But they've interviewed some good candidates. I don't know which way they would go if they went outside the Steeler family per se, but I'm like you. I think there's a chance that this thing stays in-house and they maybe massage some job titles and responsibilities, but it could be that Mike Tomlin ends up with a little bump in where he's at as far as personnel and how they put the team together with a little more say.
Right. Yeah. We, my colleague Jason Zaski reported earlier this month, there has been word that there would, like you mentioned, that there might be a combination, of Omar Khan and Brandon Hunt, because Khan is really, he's the cap guy. I mean, he's the money man. So, and Brandon Hunt, he's more of the evaluator. So I feel like the combination of the two guys, and maybe there wouldn't be a general manager, which early in the, before Kevin Colbert, there really wasn't somebody with the general manager title. So that could make sense. So Excellent. Well, thank you for your time today, Randy. I really appreciate it, and very much look forward to doing this again in the future.
Thanks, Allison. I appreciate it. Always good to talk football, and hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, sounds great.